I have another question before we go, and it's kind of, I guess, a different topic. They could connect, I guess. It's about inner child.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, how would you define the inner child?
Okay, I'm going to go back to my first teacher, George, because he did seminars. There were 3 phases. The first one was 3 days, second one was 4 days, and the last one was 5 days. And they were about self-knowledge. He never talked about non-duality. I don't know if he ever knew what non-duality was, but it's what he was teaching.
How did you learn that label, by the way?
Non-duality?
Yeah.
I learned that on my first trip in India.
Okay.
When I went up to Rishikesh and I met Muji,
Okay.
and then I studied in an ashram up there for 6 months, Advaita Vedanta, and that's the teachings in the Vedas in Hinduism about non-duality.
Okay.
So that's where I was introduced to
Cool.
it. But
George, right?
George, yeah.
Oh, the seminars.
Yeah. There was quite a bit of work in the first one and a little in the second one on inner child work. So, and I worked with him for 12 years. He and I connected immediately, and after the first training, I said, George, I want to give you support. Can I be on the staff? So I joined his staff for 12 years. Everybody was non-paid, and he began training me to be a facilitator.
Cool.
To continue from him because he had a disease that was eventually going to make it impossible for him.
Yeah.
But I had 12 years of dealing with people doing inner child work.
Wow.
So it's very powerful. I support it as a therapy completely. It has its limitations. It doesn't really fit in, certainly in the traditional non-dual teachings, because in the real hardcore non-dual teachings in Advaita, the basic teaching from Ramana Maharshi, who you know well now after your trip in India, his teaching was that if you really got non-dualism and you found out who you truly are, the I am, right? Not the body and not the mind, but your nature, your essence, right? The reality of who you are, which is that awareness, then all ego problems would fall away. Therefore, there would be no inner child issue to deal with because you would realize that the inner child was not you, right? It was no more you than the 5-year-old kid walking down the street right now while we're talking. There's no connection, right? It's a collection of memories, thoughts, right? Conditionings. So what is there to work on?
Right.
Now, the West has kind of modified and softened the hardcore Advaita teachings. And now most Western teachers like Rupert Spira, Adyashanti, I don't know about Francis Lucille, probably. They would say, don't expect just because you become enlightened that all your problems are going to go away. You're still going to have all your history to work through.
Yeah.
You still need to deal with these issues psychologically.
Is this what people call karma? Karma? Is that what that is?
Yeah, in one way you could say, I'll go with that. Yeah. Okay. That's another subject. But real briefly, there's karma plays a place in that. So Western Advaita teachers would tend to say, work on the who am I, figure out who you really are, which is this awareness. Right? And then once you get there, you'll have a much clearer picture on how to deal with the residual psychological problems that we have. That they don't just disappear because our memories don't just disappear. Right? Any more than a good example would be a mirage. You grew up in America. You know what a mirage is, right? You see water far off in the distance, especially if you go across like a desert, right? Yeah. And if you're ignorant and you say, "Oh my God, I'm really thirsty," right? And I see water up there, so you speed up and you're driving, you're chasing the water, but you never get to it. And then somebody said, "Hey, silly, that's a mirage. It's not real. It's a law of physics that creates what looks like water."
And now that you say that, I feel like in that mirage, like you think you see water because you want there to be water, right?
Well, you're certainly
'Cause
looking.
it's very high in
Yeah.
the
Water
desert.
is high in your consciousness,
Uh-huh.
right? Because you're thirsty. But even if you aren't thirsty and you're driving on the road, you're still gonna. If you drink a liter of water, you drive down the same road, you're still gonna see the mirage,
Yeah, I also see that.
right?
Actually.
So, but what the mirage analogy is like is now somebody told you, so you're aware now, right? You are enlightened in terms of a mirage. You know a mirage is not real. Do you stop seeing it?
All right,
It's still there, right?
Yeah.
And psychologically, you know, you're going to have to say, oh yeah, I remember it's a mirage, so I don't chase after it. In a way, the teachings are the same way. Is if now this again more Western advice to teachings, right? Is if I realize that I am pure awareness, certainly my suffering with that will be way reduced, and my long-term happiness will increase. But I'm still going to have what I think is my memory, right? My history,
like triggers.
come back triggers that have been hardwired in us over decades, right? They don't just disappear, at least for Westerners, right? So we still need to work on them. But we work on them as the observer now, rather than as the victim. Yeah, I guess that's the way I would summarize it. Is
Cool.
in the beginnings of inner child work, we approach them as a victim. Our parents did this to us, our teachers did this to us, right? It injured me, right? As we grow up, and now if we get into like Advaita teachings, the non-dual teachings, is we say, okay, hold on, is that really you? Right? Or are you the observer seeing a body and a mind that did have these events happen? Right? But the events never really touched you as the observer. And the observer is awareness. That's the real you that all non-dualism is guiding you to discover. So then we can say, just like, I'll give you a quick example. Right now there is a child that, this very second, there's a child that just took its last breath in Africa. Miserable life of starvation, right? Are you crying right now?
No,
No. Does it ruin your day?
it doesn't.
If your girlfriend's little brother died of some terrible disease, painful, long disease, would it ruin your day?
Yeah, most likely.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Or if it was your sister that died,
Yeah.
right? It would really wreck your life for the time being, right?
Yeah.
Why is it that the same event happens 15,000 miles away from you and you don't have a reaction? And it can happen in your house and you fall apart. The reason is that you aren't able to separate. There's no distance between you and the event. You and what appears to be, in this case, you. We're so identified with the body and the mind that anything that happens, especially when we're young, we take it personally. It happened to me. You know, one of the big things that we work through in inner child work is you're not the cause of it. Right? Typically, the little child thinks it's my fault that my father beat me up. Right?
Okay,
So we
I
say,
deserve that or something.
yeah, exactly. So we say, wait a minute, you know, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything to deserve that. Somebody else has a problem, right? We do that on a much higher level with the non-dual teachings, in that we say, step back from your mind and your body and say, to short circuit this, whatever happens to the body doesn't happen to the real me. I am the observer. But when I take myself to be the body and the mind, then I'm the victim. So we need to step back, and when we create even a little gaps, we become the observer of our thinking, the observer of the body's actions. And then it's a little bit like the poor kid in Africa, right? Is you can look and say, that's terrible. You know, what we really need to do in the world to solve that problem is you think clearly, because you're not acting out of fear, anger, anguish, depression, stress, right? You can see things clearly. When you create that similar distance between you and the body and mind that you identify as you, you look and say, oh, wait a minute, what really was going on there? Oh, my dad was an alcoholic. His dad beat him,
Yeah.
right? We can pull ourselves away and find first compassion for the perpetrator,
Yeah.
right? And then we find compassion for ourselves, and we can heal because now we have a distance and we see it more clearly. When we take it to be us, it's like the saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. We're so wrapped up in the event that we can't see clearly what really is going on. So Advaita would be about becoming the observer, stepping back. Now, we can still say, okay, there is this psychological, hopefully not physical, but certainly psychological baggage, right? Now, I can deal with it as the observer and say, okay, I can see clearly now what was going on. Maybe I can even see that my father really loved me, but he was in so much pain. This is how he reacted to his pain.
Yeah.
Because that's what he thought was normal. Now, that's the real inner child work. So is it valid? Absolutely, in the beginnings. And sometimes I've dealt with people that have said, you're not ready for a non-dual approach. You do need, go find yourself a good therapist and work
step
through
by
this.
step.
Step by step. Step by step.
No rush.
Yeah. And then when you're ready for it, then look to the spiritual side of it. Some people can do it. I have a friend who suffered terrible abuse by her stepfather. And she actually checked out. I mean, she developed the ability to like do that, separate from her body. And immediately she started taking a spiritual path because of that. But for most of us, we needed to go in steps.
Great. This is really good. Before I change, I remember in the conversations between Krishnamurti and David Bohm, Krishnamurti would mention something like, as you, let's say, awaken or whatever, like that your physical brain will actually change. Because I think I've also heard, like, if you experience like trauma and stuff, it does affects your brain circuitry or something.
Sure, we know that the brain is always being rewired through stressors and through chemicals. Yes.
So it's like as like we see more clearly, it's also like a rewiring, like a physical rewiring of your brain.
It's a good
or untangling. I don't know how to define it.
I did a photograph in Vietnam before I went to India, and it was a picture of these trees that have all the roots on the outside, that are all twisted around. And I said, you can't solve the world's problems by untangling the world's problems. You can only solve it by untangling your mind.
Makes sense.
So that's kind of, now there is a chemical process that rewires and all that stuff, but I'm not a brain specialist.
Me neither.
But what was the comment that you wanted to make about that?
No, I think as it relates to like inner child, like I feel like as this supposed inner child heals, I feel like that rewires our physical brain.
It probably does, because certainly we know it changes the chemical makeup, right? And chemistry is what changes the neurons, I believe, the neural pathways. So that would make perfect sense.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Jeez. Oh my God.